Yeah, we're going into question and answer. As I said, I'm going to try to make this interactive, and I promise I won't walk around too much. I just wanted to come down on the floor with the microphone. I wrote down some questions, but before I get to some of my questions, have to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions or topics that you'd like the panelists to either respond to or explore a little bit. Any takers?
Hi. My question, I guess, really is directed more to Tim. You know, you're talking about kind of the flexible edge, defining your edge, which makes sense. Of course, it comes down to the execution of it. So what's been your experience with, I mean, that sounds like a classic IT-OT collaboration kind of operation. How have you seen this actually go forth and be successful, or have you seen it be successful?
As I said, the main thing is you need to have some kind of alignment with IT-OT together. So to define your perimeter, as an example, if you have separate fields or various fields, each one of those will have its own data, its own design, its own architecture. They can't both treat it the same. So you need to define your main processes, your critical processes, which ones that could probably say, okay, you know, I could let it go. This is my edge going to be. Or some other processes that's really critical to your business that you cannot afford to be down or compromised. You know what, I'm going to keep those inside the edge. And then I would define my edge to be on the outer processes that if it's exposed, it may not cause as much damage as it's for other processes. It's a collaboration, basically. And the technologies out there these days with the firewalls, you could have your parameter defined on various legs of that network you have. So it could be in the cloud if you want it to be, if you're using the cloud. Yeah.
I think this question is a bit for Mike. Just looking at a couple of weeks ago, Microsoft had a big patch release, right? And unusual because I think in the States here, there was actually a requirement for everybody to have it applied within 2 weeks, right? So on a Friday afternoon, of course, I get a call from my CISO saying, basically, you know, when are you going to apply your patches? Well, guess what? My control system vendor hasn't released the patch, so I can't put it onto my system yet. And I guess I just look at the requirements coming down, and I just wonder, not to put Emerson on the spot necessarily, although we do have a Delta V, but all of the vendors out there, basically, what are you guys doing when it comes to actually looking at how do we get these patches out to people who have control systems? Because there's more pressure on us as end users to get this stuff done. And my board's not going to take, well, I'm sorry, my vendor hasn't approved the patch yet for release for much longer. So I'm just curious, is this on you guys' radar screen? Because we don't hear much about it, right?
I bet you've never heard this question. I've never heard this. No, I really appreciate the question, you know, and thanks for having Delta V. But, you know, it's kind of it's a tiered system, if you will, to take a look at. First, we encourage everyone to operate with defense in depth. You know, those types of things that are in the control system, or a safety space, they need to be regression tested. You know, I think it was you commented about this earlier, where you know, or Eric did, just apply patches. Just because the patch is out where you can sustain downtime or kind of unknown conditions that hasn't been regression tested, we're very keen on making sure that, I'm sure all vendors are, to make sure that those patches interoperate well with the control system and the safety system before we deliver them to you. So we go through this regression testing, and again, you know, if it's a 0 day or something like, these are Windows systems, you know, primarily, or there's a lot of those. It's really about tiering that out and making sure that people are aware of what the process is going to be. And if you're not hearing enough from us, that we can take that offline. But we'll certainly make sure that it is a managed process, a very well managed process, and we want to make those available as fast as we can. Did I answer your question?
Let me add to what Mark just said. Within I assume those are industrial control systems, right? So with those, they should, as I said, defense, I mean, you should have security around those devices. It's not going to be accessible directly through the internet. So the risk is a little bit lower than internet-facing systems, unless it's really 0 day that could be exposed easily. I think you'll have some time till the vendor pushes a patch. And vendors in general, they're probably good in releasing patches quickly. But from an operations perspective, as long as you have enough controls in place and mitigating controls to protect those systems, I think you should be fine till those. And I've seen companies that's still running probably Windows 95, like Bong, for example, in Seattle. They still have Windows 95 machines. As long as you have those machines controlled, protected, that will give you a little bit of time till you get those patches in. But to your point, yes, some vendors, they don't release patches easily. And sometimes even if you get the patches quickly enough, you still need some time to test them because you cannot afford bringing a network down just because those patches hasn't been tested, or they may cause one machine to go down or misbehaving on application. So I think you have to weigh the risks with those things.
If I could add just a little bit to that before you get to the next question. One of the things that we have to think about is the risk management, right? And kind of what it tells me is that perhaps the CISO or whoever is looking at that as a primary risk and we have to patch it right now, maybe we can help educate them on what the process looks like, what the other defense in-depth measures are that are there, how the control systems are built with security in mind, that they're certified, that there are perimeters, there's network architectures that prevent those high risk type of vulnerabilities that if you put a system on the internet, absolutely you want to patch it immediately, but if it's down lower in the architectures, it's not going to be as high of a risk. But we still want to push out as fast as we can to make sure that those are addressed.
And I guess the issue is there's more pressure from the board and from the people in IT asking IoT folks these kind of questions. And we say all the things we just said, but basically that doesn't answer the board's request. So I don't know how we educate the board and these other people at that level. It is different.
I have an answer for that. And I don't know if it applies to everybody. The answer to this is going back to your IT program or security program and processes. I would assume you should have vulnerability management plan in place. And those plans should be approved by whoever within your company that could approve processes or policies. And those should cascade up to the board that they need to understand you're operating within a limit. You cannot have, as I said, zero security or zero risk. There has to be some kind of a risk. And probably the boards these days should have some kind of security plus education or awareness of security in general. I mean, some of those board members probably have no clue what security is, right? So to answer your question, yeah, if you have that plan in place, then you could go back to the board and say, I'm operating within this plan, which you guys already approved. If they say, no, we're not willing to take that risk, that's fair enough, then those needs to be modified.
Okay, we have another question back here.
Hi, Dave Lafferty with IXDIN. One of the big differences with the industrial Internet of Things is that we have things, right? Physical stuff. And so what are you seeing as far as trends for protecting the physical things before they get to TCP/IP? So sensor tampering, sensor replacement, bad calibrations, bad grounds, that kind of stuff. Because that's a huge risk also.
Maybe I can, I'll jump into that one first, I guess. And one of the benefits of being kind of a new kid on the block is you get to kind of see where lots of different new things are coming. And one of the areas that I've seen really is the use of digital twins, right? To be able to take that data model of all of the sensor data and be able to analyze it and get a sense of, is that sensor really doing what it's doing? Should I believe the sensor? Should I trust the sensor? And I think this, it's starting to evolve beyond just data and starting to say, okay, I've got all of this cyber data coming from the sensors, but as you mentioned, these are things. They have physics behind them, right? So how can we start to take what really the physics models should be and you put that together with the data, and that's where I think advances in machine learning and AI to really start to say, you know, that turbine really, that I don't see how that sensor could possibly be giving me an overheat right now. So what's going on? And so I think that's one of the advances that I've noticed. You know, coming in, we look at that and say, okay, well, now let's also make sure that your AI is not the point of attack as well, right? You've got to keep doing that defense in depth each layer. But I love how we're bringing it back to the science of, well, that's what the physical item should be doing. So let's make sure that the sensors are in line with that.
I think I would add to that, you know, there's some principles for security being, or physical security being one of those, right? And we always like to say that security starts at the plant, at the gate of the plant. If you're coming into the plant, and you have to think about physical security as well as logical security. Now, there's some, you know, new technologies, drones, wireless, BLE, whatever types of technologies that may extend those things beyond the perimeter of the plant. But for us, it's always a conversation with the customer as part of the architecture. What's the threat analysis? What type of threat modeling are we doing here? And physical has to be included in that as well as the logical.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in on this one because it tweaked a couple of things in my mind. First of all, your comment about, you know, you're entering a plant, you have to start thinking different. It's just a little story I'll tell you. When I worked for many years in central Michigan at Dow's headquarters, but there was also a manufacturing site there. And they had a sign up at the gate, right at the front, or at the gate when you drove in, the employee's gate. And there was a sign on the fence, and it said, and this was driven primarily by safety, but it could equally apply to security. The sign said, "This is a chemical plant. Things are different here." To get people, just to remind them if they needed a gentle reminder. The other point I want to make is that, you know, the point that was brought up about the understanding the physics, for example. I look around the room, and I know a lot of people in the room, and I know that some of you have written control code and control strategies for control systems. And I would ask you if, in your opinion, if a good control engineer should base a vital, critical, or sensitive decision and control logic on any single sensor. And the classic example of this, and I'm a chemical engineer by training, so I know enough to be dangerous, okay? Because I haven't done chemical engineering for a long time. But if you're reading a level sensor, and the level sensor says that the level is dropping, and you know that the input, the stuff going in exceeds the stuff going out, there's probably something wrong with that sensor. Or at least you should take a look at it. So when you're looking at the control code, you don't believe just because the sensor, and this is ancient history. This has got nothing to do with cybersecurity. People used to do it because they know the sensor could fail. It's mechanically unreliable. Well, now anything can fail, but it can fail through a deliberate act now. Because as these things get smarter, they also get more vulnerable. So it's just, to me, you go back to the principles of engineering 101 and start thinking about those things. Don't trust your eyes, virtual or otherwise. Now, I got a question for the room. Since we have some extra time here, I've got the luxury of maybe stirring things up a little bit. And I'll ask the question is, in this session, did you hear anything that you found even the least bit provocative? Anything that you, or have you heard it all before? That's a valid answer. But something that got you thinking, like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And if you did, is that something you'd want to share or ask a question about or even offer a comment on, an observation, if you put two things came together as a result of something you heard here today? So with that little intro, anyone want to take the mic? Okay.
This is being recorded, correct? So I worked for Aera Energy with Tim, and I heard him say that we were going to be able to come back down. I just wanted to make a statement that I'm going to hold you to that. The other thing is, I talked to Tim earlier, and he was going to be a panelist. And I'd just like to make the statement that he did an outstanding job being a speaker.
Thank you. Thank you on his behalf. Thank you. Sounds good. Anyone else?
So my name's Steve from Epcor Utilities in Canada. I was intrigued with the discussion about the honeypot manufacturing site. I'm wondering, have you heard of anything like that for utilities? We're quite concerned about our cybersecurity.
Well, first of all, it was a session that I attended. So again, I can, if you want afterward, I can send you the web link to where there was a report about it. It was actually the first time I've even heard in any industrial IoT of a company going to such lengths to really prove out. And during S4, there was definitely some, I'm trying to think of the phrase. There was definitely some chuckles because apparently the honeypot was so real that they were reported into ISAC that, oh, here's this factory that someone needs to take action to help protect. Right. So even the people who are helping monitor the security of things happening within the U.S. were fooled. He didn't seem to give any indication of anything from a utility standpoint, but the impression that I got was that it was done for a manufacturing or a factory environment, but all of the learnings could easily be applied to anything from an industrial perspective. And there's ways in which you could look at that and start to say, you know what, and I won't use the brand, but they had identified a directory of a company's equipment. Well, you could just simply take those steps for the equipment that you have, and you use that to go back into your analysis and your think like a hacker and bring that back and say, okay, here's how we apply those lessons.
I'd like also to add to what Mark said. Trend Micro just did exactly the same thing, putting
That's what I'm
honeypots.
talking about, actually. It's Trend Micro that did
Yeah,
it.
they did the same thing, and it's published. I'll say it's public information. You could go just Google Trend Micro on Honey IoT, and you'll be able to see within hours how many people got actually into that honeypot and did stuff.
So if you thought building a 1,000-bed hospital in China in 2 weeks was impressive, we can stand up a company like practically in no time, and it's totally virtual, and it's actually, people think it's real.
Eric, one more comment on that. And I don't have the details on it, but I'm pretty sure the DOE is doing operator interactions and testing. I believe they have the program, and I heard someone, mention earlier from, I believe, NIST, right, in your session, that they have tools to help to come in and actually do some of the testing for you. So I would encourage you to reach out to DOE, if not someone else.
And it's free.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can probably, with a little bit more background, put you in touch with some people that, if they're not in this room right now, that would know a little bit more about particularly that sector.
Good afternoon. My name is Mandy Huth. I'm from Kohler Company. And I'm going to take Eric up on his recommendation. And a couple of things that I heard that are kind of floating around in my brain that I'd love to hear from you. We talk a little bit about, I'll call it IT-OT convergence, right? Similar requirements, business requirements, talking to the cloud and such, right? And then we talk about the edge. And, Gartner is talking about network security, and there's something they're calling secure access service edge. So the edge is no longer really the edge. So how do we define that? And then the last thing that kind of triages with me is, identity and access management, and no one does that really, really well. At least I've not found a use case that shows a lot of people that do that really, really well. So when I take these three things together, you have, I need to be talking to the internet, or I need to be communicating to someone. And then you've got an edge that's really hard to define, and then you have access control issues, right? So as I hear different pieces that you're all touching on, I'm wondering if it might be a good dialogue or any thoughts you might have about how we can address that holistically, right?
That could be a good segue. Keep in mind, at 4 o'clock this afternoon, we're having these roundtables.
I'm speaking tomorrow, so
Yeah.
we'll talk a little bit about it.
Okay, good. Yeah, if you wanted to explore it with some of the people, whoever shows up at the table today, too, that would be good. I don't know, any comments from up here?
I'll make a comment on that. So I think identity and access management or identity edge, and I believe Gartner also says that identity is the next firewall, right? Right. So it has to be part of the architectural solution, and from system interactions, from identifying what processes, what role-based access control, or identity management or identity whether it's a device or whether it's a human, it has to be part of the conversation. And I would agree that I think this is still in the burgeoning phases. Probably enterprises may do it well for customer-facing, e-commerce type of solutions. But when you bring it down from enterprise down into the SCADA level or the plant network level, and then down below that, it's less pervasive because I believe the technology that have been employed there for a number of decades don't support that type of protocol or technologies.
Anyone else?
Well, sorry, I just want to add on a comment onto that
Yeah.
one as well. And I think if you bring up, you had a couple of different areas there, right? And if we bubble those up to, the concept of trust, right? And we start to think about, we used to have trust because everything was air gapped off and we knew, okay, this would talk to that and so on. Therefore, you built it to be trustworthy. Now we start to see things integrating in. We start to see, oh, well, this piece of software was on a dedicated piece of hardware with, hardware security built in, and it was air gapped. And wow, we want to be able to have a twin that is exactly the same. So let's just take the software, put it on an industrialized PC. And by the way, it needs to have good performance. So let's put that in the edge office. But is it secure? Well, now the software was written to a certain security spec. I don't trust it anymore on here, right? So as that twin becomes part of that environment, how do you make sure that it's playing nicely, right? You could equally start to talk about all of our networks are building up on top layers of layer. Well, I've got vendor X and vendor Y. How do I know that I can trust between them, right? So I love your topic because I think trustworthiness is something that that we want to participate in. And I mentioned earlier on that we're relatively new to the space, but we jumped in fairly quickly with the Industrial Internet Consortium. And there was a couple of topics in there that we felt very passionate about. And there's a paper coming out this year on software trustworthiness. I think it actually loses its effectiveness because it shouldn't be just software. It's the whole ecosystem that we need to trust. But yeah, I'll definitely be at your presentation tomorrow because I'm interested.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Christian Allenson with Chevron. I don't know if this really applies to the panelists, but in the spirit of getting your thoughts out. So something I've had a lot of frustration with is, especially from Emerson, this is going to be a good thing to start with. All of your devices have really, really good diagnostics, amazing diagnostics. But what is increasingly hard for those of us that may not be Delta V customers is getting that information out. So when we talk about kind of the next step of maybe if we wanted to apply physical models or process models to our data and see what makes sense in context, that's really interesting and really cool. But when I can look at the diagnostics from, say, a level transmitter and see that the DP is low, but the upstream pressure is actually quite high, that probably tells me the same information as comparing it to a process model. So just a thought, I'm continuously seeing this middle piece of getting the detailed information from the transmitter, not just the PV out and into as accessible as some of the other information. It seems to be getting left behind by a lot of companies and a lot of strategies. So just putting that out there.
So I'll say from an Emerson perspective, since you called us out on that, that we are taking a look at that and we are exploring ways with some of our products that we're doing that are under new development, whether it's inside apps or whether it's new analytics, bringing that data out. And I'm encouraged to have a conversation about that, specifically for your plant or space, and make sure that we're hearing what you're saying. But I believe we're addressing some of those, and they're not all of them are fully released, but they're in development, certainly leaning that direction.
This brings up another aspect, an interesting aspect of this phrase that everybody likes to use, IT-OT convergence. It's another one of those catchphrases that drives me crazy. But anyway, OT drives me crazy too. But anyway, I've always had this dream, since I've been working in this cybersecurity space, that if we can ever reach a point where the data in the, I'll call them, for lack of a better word, the IT components, the computers and the networks and the packets and all of the rest of that kind of stuff, can be monitored, interpreted, and presented, the information it represents, presented in the context that an operating engineer or an operator would understand, then to me, that's as close to ideal as possible. Because right now, you know, people say, oh, well, send the data to a SOC and let them figure it out. Well, the people in a SOC know networks. They don't know anything about the plant, right? Probably. So wouldn't it be nice if we could somehow turn this IT, networking, TCP/IP, frames, and all that mumbo jumbo, and actually present to the operations people not the raw data, but basically the interpretation of the data. And I don't even know what I'm talking about. But one of the things that I do in my consulting business is I provide advisory services. I've provided advisory services to several small startups in this space when they were just getting off the ground, and I won't mention names. But that's one of the challenges I've given every one of them. I said, if you can figure out how to do this, you'll really be on to something. As far as I know, nobody's figured out how to do it yet, but I think it's a noble aspiration, maybe to put it that way. Anyone else? Or do we want to break early? I see, and I just killed the mood, right? All right, well, I thank you. I remind you, we'll reconvene at 4 o'clock, and that's where we're going to have our roundtable discussions. So if you've got one of these topics you want to explore with like-minded people, lay claim to a table and have at it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.